Once upon a time, there was a girl. And once upon a time, there was a group called the Desi Jess Brigade. Now, they weren't nearly as infamous in the reviewer sphere as, say, the Nostalgia Critic, or famous enough, or nearly as well known as some people, or sometimes even having their own popularity, small popularity, like the Review Utopia. But they were their own small group. And amongst this quartet were four founders. Half of them don't exist anymore. J.O. goes by Jacob Chapman now. Professor Otaku, who still has his own review show lately, but mainly sticks with history. Vix, who's gone off the face of the earth. I can't tell you about her. And Arcana, who still does Class Reflexes today and still talks about anime. And amongst this group, there was a saying in a show that they loved. Only real men watch Princess Tutu. I didn't know what that truly meant until I watched it last year. And now I do. Only a real man can watch Princess Tutu and see that it's more than just a story about this adorable little duckling who saves a prince. That is a deconstruction of fairy tales and a reconstruction of them in a way that is better than Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman. Yeah, I said it, and I meant it. Why? Because they do it without sex, without being overly violent, without gratuitous boob shots, or anything like that. They don't have a character getting randomly raped. They don't try to make us think that the rape scene was love. They do it by telling a story. By looking at the tropes and the cliches and the facts and stuff about the story and questions it. Questions the foundations, the meanings, the makings of it all, by using various tropes. A side character, a side knight, a character destined to die, a mythical being that gives wisdom, and all that. It also asks the question, how do our characters feel about being forced into these situations? Too often I've seen reviewers and critics and, well, let's face it, assholes on the net going, I can't believe you cried over a fictional character. Well, if you're not crying over a fictional character, then I'm sorry, but the story failed you. You failed the story as well. Because a good storyteller should make these characters jump off the page and make you see them as real as you are. A good writer should make you feel for these characters, make you feel something for how the story goes. It makes you want to engage with it. So that way, even if you don't relate to them, you could feel something. If the story doesn't do that, then it has failed you. Now, again, this is all up to interpretation. I've seen some people go, oh yeah, Ellis is such a good writer. Garth is such a great writer. Look at him. He made us realize how complex and tragic Homelander really is. Well, I just think it's a stupid twist. That's what a good story, a good anime should do to you. I frequently joke that if I'm not busy making you smile and laugh or cheer at my action scenes, I'm making you cry like my bitch. That's because I want an emotion from you as a storyteller. Just the same, I want emotion from my anime. I want to be at the end either crying my eyes out because of a little girl dying in her mom's arms because of the most tragic things she couldn't do. I want to be cheering when I see Simone triumphing over his own darkness and bringing his willpower and defeating a god. And I want to cheer when I see a little duck save a prince. I'm going to let the story play a little bit before I tell some of you guys what my own problems are, before we talk about what makes this plot great. Because Mythos seems to be busy with his girl right now. Mythos put his hand down on the table, his fingers covering the words Rue had been reading. She spoke up, startled, her mind still caught in the early formal and stiff language of the royal petitions and appeals she and Mythos had been working through. Various advisors and scribes and petitioners buzzed about the room, making something of a nuisance of themselves as they brought in more proposals, or discussed specific cases, or bustled about to appear important, or merely tried to get a glimpse of the royal couple. It was enchanting to see how much the prince and princess were in love, even when flooded with paperwork. "Come, my princess," Mythos cajoled, with a smile. "Let's hide away our counselors for a moment." "Okay, excuse me, I need to check something. There's no way Raphis is a word." "Raphis. Adjective. Unconventional and slightly disreputable, especially in an attractive manner. His raffish air." "Thank you, Twilight." "You're welcome. Any chance to help you understand more of the dictionary?" Rue eyed the piles of papers that still covered her cluttered desk as distastefully as they were insects, and heavily took to her prince's hand. The idea of sneaking away made it all the more appealing, even if they both knew it was a fiction, and if only for a moment. She rose, the long skirt of her wine-red gown rippling like water with her movements, while as rich and elegant as many of her ball gowns. It was a simple dress, comfortable to work in, especially in the summer heat. She had made the image of her ballet practice dress, the same elegant cut, the same simple ruffling sleeves, a small and perhaps frivolous reminder of who she was to herself. Mythos led her out to the council chamber through a small, discreet servants' entrance, and those who had noticed had the good sense to pretend they didn't. Out in the corridor, knelt down under the eye of some dutiful guard or another, they kissed. For a space, they simply held each other, savoring this moment alone. Ever since they had returned to the fairy tale kingdom, Rue and Mythos had found their hands full. Without their darker emotions, those in the fairy tale kingdom had been living as much as a waking dream as the people of Goldcrown had been when Dulcimere's story controlled the town. The kingdom was no longer a smooth, well-oiled machine it had been for as long as Mythos could remember. There were innovators and artists in chains now, instead of a kingdom frozen in a moment of perfect happiness and tranquility. But the sudden jumble of emotions at times also led to disputes, disagreements, and even crimes of passion and premeditation. Such things were unheard of before, and in their very novelty struck fear and uncertainty in the subjects' hearts. His people needed his leadership and guidance now as they never had before. At last Mythos sighed. "I suppose we should return. I keep hoping they will run out of petitions, but it seems all of my kingdom wants to set into motion at once the changes and ideas that never occurred to them after all their wildness and passion had fled the ravens." "You know, not all those ideas are rubbish," Ruth said, just a touch of sarcastic disbelief in her voice. "One of them even proposed opening a school for the arts. Perhaps I could see to that, and leave you to your stuffy counselors." She teased, even as she knew she couldn't leave Mythos to such a dire fate on his own. After all, she was the one who had rescued him from facing it alone in the first place. She had started all his advisors and then charmed him by sweeping into the council room looking for Mythos. He had been holed up in there for countless hours, and she had tired of waiting, and then insisted it was her sovereign duty as his to consider the petitions of their subjects. Well, Perhaps I shall help you oversee this school, if for no other reason to sneak away on occasion to dance with you there. Mythos smiled back as Rue tucked her hand to the crook of his elbow, and he stepped into the chaos of the council chamber once more, stately and regal, as if they had not stolen away for a tryst. Okay. Things I don't like about this fic. You've got nothing, don't you? I'm trying, Trixie. I'm trying. I really am. Ever since I really started reviewing and looking into these fics more, I am trying to think of something bad to say about them once in a while. I am. But this fic, goddamn, if it ain't so good. I can't think of it. Maybe if I wanted to, I could, but I had to struggle for it. Maybe that's something interesting to think about, folks. And this is something I want you people at home to think about. When you enjoy the story really well, do you really need to think about what the downsides are? I'm sure you're going to encounter people out there who are going to tell you what they hate about a story. I really like this. Well, I hated it, and you suck for doing that. It's a common refrain. Or, you're a shill, or, you just consume gobble, gobble, gobble. We've all heard that refrain. You've seen it on Reddit posts and the like. But the problem is, sometimes we do see the problems of these stories. We know about them, but sometimes we enjoy a story so much we just prefer to focus on the good. I know. Consume, more. You're just a consumer. Yeah. And sometimes we also just want to enjoy something. Yes, we know that burger is probably greased up and such, but we want to enjoy it. And isn't the idea of enjoying something better than just, complaining about it every 5 minutes? Isn't being happy just a little bit better than just complaining and whining all the time about a story? And getting hurt? It was a slow, tedious story to write. It did not all cooperate. But auteur has said stories should live in the hearts of people, not people in the hearts of stories. So Fakir kept writing, slowly and meticulously spinning out all the threads, starting from the first tangled web, Drosselmeyer's life, and then strand by strand, he wove into Prince's story, the ravens and gold crowns. So many threads this tale, Rue's, auteur's, his own, all the townsfolk's tales. But the one that seemed to gleam like a thread of gold in a tapestry, worn with time, was Tutu's, woven in and out from all the others, at times seeming to weaken our existence, but always returning, tying them all together. Occasionally, Artur would come to see them both at the hospital, Duck because she had not been released, and Fakir because he spent every moment he could there by her side. "Have you ever thought about publishing?" Artur asked him one day, his voice low as Duck dozed slightly in the hospital bed. Fakir had frowned, startled by the question. "Whatever for? Isn't writing it enough? How else will the story live in the hearts of the people? It'll be there for them to read and believe if they want to. Besides," Artur continued more practically, "this should help guarantee that even if the manuscript itself is damaged or altered, the story cannot be manipulated." Fakir nodded, and the two fell in almost a companionable silence. "A new story. It'll need a new title to distinguish itself from the old tale, but also mark a new beginning," Artur said, after a space. Fakir, his eyes fixed on the sheet of papers in his hands, did not reply immediately. Duck, shifting in her sleep, drew his gaze to her. Color had returned to the cheeks since he had regained much of her strength. But now she chafed all the more at the restrictions placed on her by the hospital staff. The number of times Doug had asked if she was well enough to dance had yet worn on both their patients and Fakir's own. But for once, having nothing more weighing on her than the upcoming performance of Sleeping Beauty, she couldn't help wanting to throw her all into the dance. For although she had loved the ballet form that for first moment she had seen the heartless prince dancing, there had always been something else before, something more important than her own practicing for her to worry about. Mythos and Rue's promise to visit her performance spurred her on even more. She respected them both as dancers, and wanted them to be proud of her. The peaceful look on her sleeping face, so at odds with her usual exuberance and animation, brought a small smile to Fakir's face. "I'm thinking of calling it Princess Tutu," he said at last, after the character whose story was never meant to be. It's tough making a sequel to a great anime. It's tough making a sequel to a great story. I mean, to see how divisive some of these long sequels have been. But what the story does right is actually take the plot threads that were there and follow up on them. It does follow through what one of my favorite animated movies of all time, The Last Unicorn, has said. There are no happy endings, because nothing ever ends. Oh sure, we closed the book on Aragorn, and we know he rules the kingdom. Well, we don't know what challenges he faces later on. I don't agree with George R.R. Martin about the tax policy line, but I do agree with him that we don't know what happens next, about the challenges he faces. Well, sure, we know it might come to a happy ending, but we don't know exactly what happens afterwards. That lies the intrigue. Of course, we all know J.R.R. Tolkien said no to the sequel, but that's beside the point. So that's what this does. It sees the ending of Fakir working alongside with Duck and follows through with it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can see the ending being just, he does write the story that brings her back to human. Or it just ends from there. But this author does take it in, it all works out, it all makes sense. As this does play off a sequel tropes of, how do we get there? How do we get to point B? What does it mean for the characters to face their happy end? And that's what I like about Mythos and Rue's section. Because it asks that question. Because sometimes for some of us, we put these characters to a happy end and we say, that's done. So, in the end, how do the characters feel about being eternally happy and eternally having their happy ever after? Will their world grow stagnant? Will they always say, I love you, and mean it? Will they all want a return to the trauma or the adventures that they've had once? That becomes the question, and that's what becomes interesting. That's what drags the reader in. And that's what makes the story a really good sequel. Fakir sat back in his carrel at the library, shaking out his fingers cramped from writing before returning to his task once more. He had taken to coming to the academy library to work soon after Duck had been released from the hospital and cleared for light exertion. It was much easier trying to write about without her there. It wasn't just her constant questions and interruptions, but his own desire to talk to her, to spend time with her, as if he were still trying to make up for those missing months when she had returned to being a duck once more, as if trying desperately to overwrite that time with new, happier memories. That had gotten in the way of productivity. So now Duck was off observing the rehearsals for Sleeping Beauty, and the doctors were satisfied with the progress of her recovery, so he'd be allowed to participate next week. And here he was, alone in the perpetual gloom of the library, leaving his tale. It was lonely without her. Nowhere near as lonely as it had been back before this mess started. Once he had returned to being a duck, and he felt as if losing her entirely. It was foolish sentimentality, he told himself firmly. He'd see her at the end of the day. And once he finished with practice, and he was finished with writing. It needs to be done, he told himself. The story needs to be written. Because, while everyone had their memories back, Fakir wanted to take no chances. He would write out all that happened, give voice to the town's past, and put rest to past mistakes. Part of this new story now laying on the desk beside Fakir, and yet there was still much more to be written. And so the days passed. All those touched by the curse of the previous tale had been healed, and now the Prince and the Raven was no more than a collective dream to most of the townsfolk. Some dismissed these memories out of hand, as dreams, as bouts of madness, as stories heard and remembered but not lived. Others seemed to accept some memories and reject others in a manner that was incomprehensible to Fakir. Others were willing to believe all, and Fakir was more grateful to what he had sunk. But he could not bear to lie to Charon, to hide from Charon how much he had wronged a man who had only ever loved him as a son. Fakir felt his heart in his throat, and when he faced Charon's grave expression, recounted all, sparing nothing of what he had become, of what he had done. And still somehow Charon had forgiven him, had embraced him as his son. It startled him still, how kind people could be. Charon, Mythos, Duck. Still not done yet? Surprised by the voice, Fakir blotted the sheet before him, and looked at the fine duck poking her head around a bookcase, looking half eager and half sheepish at her own excitement. Fakir grimaced, setting aside his pen and gesturing vaguely at the page before him. Hardly. I had just gotten to the part where they cut Drosselmeyer's hands off. It's strange to think after all the stories he spun, now there's one being spun about him. I feel bad for you, cooped up in here all day, Duck sympathized, looking at the books that laid open on Fakir's desk and the mess of papers in front of him. Then, trying on her almost winsome smile, she asked, You want to take a deep break and practice with me? Fakir grunted. I don't need more than 5 or 4 hours to practice a day. You're the one who needs to put in more time. But I... The rest of her sentence was lost as she mumbled, embarrassed, her eyes on the floor. What was that? She looked down, now blushing and glaring at once. I said I miss you. I mean, we see each other, but, spending time with you... Oh, never mind, she said, breaking off her frustration and embarrassment. Her cheeks puffed up in a pout. If this was such full sentimentality, at least he wasn't the only one losing to it. Well, he said, picking up a book and a few sheets of paper. Maybe I could work on this part in the practice room with you. Duck, with Pink and Lily looking out over her shoulders, stuck a glance at the full house from the edge of the curtains. The show would start soon, and would already feel the tears of stage fright setting in. She had practiced and practiced, but the thought of going out there of so many eyes made her knees a little wobbly. Ah! Lily squealed, not so softly in Duck's ear. The rustling and light chatter of the audience, however, prevented her from being heard beyond the stage. Are you nervous, Duck? She asked sympathetically, shaking her friend's shoulder in time with her words. Afraid you're going to forget your stats are our most famous alumni who've come to especially see the performance? He's not the only one, Pete quipped, polishing her Lily's own slightly trembling words. Oh, hush! Lily held back, shoving her hands behind her back. Anyway, rumor has it soon Miss Ruth's going to be running her own ballet academy somewhere. Maybe if we flunk out Gold Crown, she'll take pity on us and take us in. I don't see her on Mythos anywhere, though. You're making me more nervous, Pete kissed. Well, I'm making me less nervous, Lily sang back. The idea that darkness and... Oh yeah, folks, I'm in the audience too. Hi! Can be what brings back the Raven is an inspired one. It doesn't bring back the villain and ruin everything that everyone's tried to accomplish, but adds another dimension to both the villain and to our characters. After all, what is left when you remove the struggle? How do you re-engage the story? You put back the conflict. And sometimes it can work. Sometimes it can't. Sometimes you have and somehow the Emperor's returned line of thinking. And that's what the story feels like it's a commentary on, even though Rise of Skywalker didn't even come out yet. You had to be forced to put back the conflict. And what does that do to the characters as they try to explore their own ways of coming back? I like that this whole entire thing seems to spread out from Fakir's own desire of a happy ending. Almost as if the story tries to punish him for even daring to break the happy ending. But in the end, it shows that you had to work hard to continue that happy ending. Fakir still feels dark, but a person who's willing to let light in after he works hard to achieve his goals. Duck is as happy as peppy as ever. And the finale was great. I was afraid that Tutu wasn't going to do much, but then he showed me how this dance built up into crescendo. A dance. That's what this whole entire thing felt like, folks. A dance, a musical number, or a ballet. All being told with its highs and lows. Because I don't know about you, but certain scenes I was reading, I could hear the music play. Either from Swan Lake or some other musical number where the music reached a high and a dramatic low. It was glorious. While her friends argued behind her, Duck had been scanning the faces of the audience. She'd been looking forward to Rue and Mythos coming to performance since the very moment they left, soon after the curse had been lifted from the town. But they seemed to be nowhere to be found. She managed to spot Fakir at least, sitting mere feet away from her, in a seat that faced the edge of the stage, right in the center she had expected. "What are you doing here?" she tried to mouth out to him, without drawing too much attention to herself. He raised his eyebrows at her antics, and Brendan, as a few girls sitting near him, caught sight of her and giggled. Duck hastily backed away from the curtain, but she stepped back, walking across the stage and then backstage. She realized why she chose in that particular seat. The wobbliness led to her knees, and a definite spring in her step. She let the elbows look pink and little, and boldly declare, "We're gonna be great! Now let's go break some legs, or whatever it is." That's reacting. Are you wearing a trippet ball then?" Duck just grinned broadly. Mythos and Rue quietly made their way down the aisle just as the curtain rose. They had meant to leave with plenty of time to chat with Fakir and Duck before the performance, but one obligation or another kept delaying their departure. At least they made it in time for the performance, and fortunately, special seats in front had been reserved for them as distinguished alumni of the Academy. After seeing them, the usher quietly slipped away, and both began discreetly looking for Fakir among the audience, surprised he wasn't nearby. Surely Fakir would not miss Duck's performance, and Rue was already thinking of how she would make him regret his selfish disregard for Duck's feelings, when Mythos pointed to the end of the row they were seated in. Rue raised her eyebrows, surprised that Fakir hadn't taken a better seat reserved for himself. She felt a pang of something like guilt for misjudging him yet again, but dismissed it. An entire lifetime of rivalry and ill will wasn't going to disappear overnight, although perhaps she shouldn't be quite so ready to expect the worst from him. It was the beginning of the third act she realized why Fakir had chosen that particular seat, and felt any lingering resentment she had for him dissolve entirely. On stage, all the guests had arrived to celebrate Princess Aurora's marriage to Prince Florimond. The ladies of the palace greeted the guests with fiery gestures of welcome and joy, and there amongst the parade of dancers, in the back, and near the edge of the stage with the young handmaids, right in front of the bad seat Fakir had chosen, was Duck. Most of the audience had eyes only for the center of the stage, where ballerinas moved in intricately geometric choreography, captivated by the grace of their interlocking gestures. Their carefully harmonized jet entourant. Fakir's gaze rested only down on the one red-haired maiden, dressed like the others in pale rosy colors dawn, and dancing on the fringes of the stage, the pendant at her neck glimmering now and then as she moved. Duck did not have many steps, but his eye, trained and honed in ballet as it was, could see the careful precision behind her small, graceful movements. It was the grace of ballet, not the natural elegance, but one that was painstakingly trained into the body. Her persistence were proper and point to work, although brief, so the result of arduous practice. Rue's tulips, while they were still under the course of her story, and Duck's unending practice had since paid off. It was clear in the smile that never left her face or eyes, that despite how minor her role was, she loved every moment of it. And that made Fakir smile too, because he knew this, more than anything, was what her heart desired. When the ballet instructor had asked Fakir as an exceptional student if he was interested in participating in this production, even at this late date, Fakir surprised nearly everyone by declining the honor. His refusal had fueled all sorts of speculation among the student body, but his reasoning was really quite simple. Given his own level of skill, he wouldn't be able to dance at all with someone like Duck. If he could not dance with Duck, he was more than happy to sit and watch her dance on her own. Which does make me see how well both the anime and the story were crafted. I love how each chapter began with a fairy tale, one that surprisingly related to the story, and made me think about all the tropes therein. So yeah, fantastic story. Well, looks like the performance is over. Let's see how this all wraps up. After the performance was over, Rue discovered yet another advance in Fakir's choice of seeing when she saw his seat was already empty. How awfully sly of him, trying to be the first person to get backstage, Rue sniffed, although her lips betrayed a smile. Behind the drawn curtains, the dancers exited the stage, still riding the height of the performance even as exhaustion began to set in. Adoring students and family members clustered about performers, the principal dancers in particular surrounded by little islands of well-wishers. Fakir had ducked behind a set of stage props, staying in the shadows and out of sight as the crowd moved away toward the exits. Duck was the last to leave the stage, taking one last smiling look at the beautifully painted set before descending to the steps. You don't have to keep staring at it, Fakir said, emerging, and from behind his back produced a small bouquet of flowers that he hid before the performance. You'll have plenty of opportunities to be on that stage in the future. At the sight of the bouquet offered to her, Duck blushed, her eyes sparkling. She reddened even further when she touched Fakir's hand to accept the flowers, and he grasped her free hand in his own. And I have you to thank for that, Duck said, standing on her toes to give him a quick peck on the cheek. She broke into a teasing smile as Fakir's cheeks matched her own. By the time Rue and Mythos had finally made their way through the throng of eager students about them, the dancers, save for Duck, had already filled out for the dressing rooms. At Rue's not very carefully suppressed smirk and Mythos' bright smile, Fakir had cleared his throat and replied defensively. Chiron told me I should get her flowers, although I can't say for sure. He teased, his eyes softening as he turned to Duck once more, their hands still laced together. You're still far from being a prima donna. Duck, blessing a brilliant society of scarlet once more, this time for different reasons, elbowed Fakir quite firmly as Moo and Rithos laughed. Rue gave the smaller girl a tight hug. Duck, you were wonderful. Do you really think so, Rue? Duck asked, her voice unsure. The teasing from Fakir, what she considered praise from Rue, was starting to make Duck nervous again. Almost impossible to believe that such talented dancers could praise her clumsy, inelegant Duck. It is true, Duck. As I am a prince, I am a man of my word, Mythos assured her, offering her a small bow. Yes, someday you could dance in my school as a prima ballerina. Rue smiled sincerely as her prince nodded in agreement. At this, Duck remembered what Lily had said before the performance, and her voice echoed the excitement in her eyes. That's right! I heard from Lily you were opening a school. Will you be teaching there? It'll be a lot of work, won't it? Mythos chuckled. It'll take some time as we only began planning for a new academy. But I think such a school might help my citizens learn to live with their darkness. He continued, a touch of sorrow in his voice, just as we have learned to live with the ravens in our own hearts. Both Rue and Fakir started the statement, but their expressions lightened when Mythos smiled at Rue and Duck gave Fakir's hand a reassuring squeeze. The guilt, Rue knew from her own bitter experience, would never vanish, never wear away entirely. But it seemed both the prince and his knight were learning to live with the shadows in their hearts, rather than being ruled by them. Seeing Fakir relax again, Duck's thoughts turned to the fledglings he attended, and all of their kindred who had returned to the world they belonged to. What happened to the ravens? Did they all return to people's hearts? Some of them, Mythos replied, but others, it appears, came out of the land itself. Some just seem to be nothing more than birds, or scraps with magic. It's been a mess, actually, Ruse added. In fact, a handful of them insist on following us everywhere, even when we travel. They made an awful racket when they tried to nest in a tree right by our window. Something in Rue's tone made Duck and Fakir pity the ravens, more so than the royal couple, with the bows that started to pester, for they could only imagine the upbringing they're handed out by this abominable princess. Not for the first time did the four friends and marveled at how much things had changed. The next day, Duck, with Fakir at her side, saw Rue and Mythos off in their swan-drawn chariot by the lake, just outside the walls of this town. Mythos and Rue were accompanied by a handful of ravens that followed them into Gold Crown. The birds now darting about, trying to get a rise out of the regal swans until Rue challenged the mischievous birds into a semblance of good behavior. One raven in particular fled towards Duck, as he asserted was one of the fledglings he had cared for not too long ago. It settled on her shoulder just for a moment, trying to preen Duck's hair as the girl laughed. To everyone's great surprise, when Duck offered the wayward birds a handful of sunflower seeds he had brought as a present, none of them dipped their fingers. With some reluctance, the friends said their farewells and, smiling, promised to visit again soon. The prince and princess both wished sure themselves of each other. As they left for their kingdom this time, as Duck waved to Rue and Mythos area in the distance, strong arms wrapped around her. She leaned back into Fakir's chest, thinking that perhaps this, her life and what she thought she could do, had changed most of all. Fakir, do you want to dance? Fakir's eyes looked down at Duck in surprise at the sudden question. You never get tired of dancing, do you? He smiled teasingly, even as he knew the answer. Duck nodded. But today, I want to dance only for myself. I want to dance with you. The pendant in her throat caught and gleamed in the early morning light. The rich stains of red entwined in a jewel shaped in the promise of a new beginning. And in the distance, one last raven winked like a smudge of darkness, its flight seeming to sketch a path between Goldcrown and the fairy tale kingdom. Because, after all, reality and story are neighboring realms. One down, thousands more to go. Good night.